Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. The year is 33 BBY. There's been growing instability in the Outer Rim Free Trade Zone. There's more and more alarming news coming from the region that the Trade Federation and other mega conglomerates are operating from. There have been accusations that they basically turned the free trade zone into their own personal fiefdom, and they're now levying fines and taxes of their own for any third-party operator who chooses to do business there. At the same time, there's accusations of price gouging, indentured servitude, and many other malicious actions that are mostly due to the lack of Republic presence in the free trade zone. The future is uncertain, but it's clear that the galaxy is looking towards the Republic governments led by Supreme Chancellor Finis Valorum to intervene in the situation. Now, this is a pretty big challenge for Valorum. He could potentially remove the free trade zone and start taxing the companies that operate in the region and levying tariffs for import and export out of those regions. Valorum could bring all of the trade regulations and standards that you see in the rest of the galaxy to this free trade zone. But of course, that would enrage the Outer Rim mega conglomerates, many of whom have direct representation now within the Galactic Senate and have the ability to challenge the Chancellor. They had formed powerful alliances with other representatives in exchange for credits and economic opportunities. Those who disobeyed them were punished and embargoed by the many corporate interests that were aligned with the Trade Federation. Basically, they were a special interest lobbying group that also had the ability to vote in elections. Very powerful. And their argument for why the free trade zones should remain untaxed and without tariffs is that the only reason why this area of the galaxy was able to produce tax revenue was thanks to them in the first place, in their massive effort to crack down on piracy and bandits. And in their defense, they did risk a lot of capital by setting up operations in the free trade zone, something that not a lot of companies were willing to do. The Trade Federation specifically was the biggest problem. They had gathered quite a lot of political support, and their trade defense fleet was one of the major military presences in the Outer Rim. And their complete dominance over trade in the region gave them a lot of power to control the citizens of the Republic that lived in the Outer Rim. Basically, imagine living on a planet owned by Amazon that relies heavily on imports from Amazon of Amazon products. You also work in an Amazon factory and live in an Amazon condo. Without checks and balances to their power, how long do you think it'll take for Amazon to start raising rent prices in order to cover their operation costs? And then imagine if you don't have enough money to pay for your Amazon condo, you have to borrow money from Amazon, and you also happen to work there. You can see all the problems that could emerge from relying on just one corporation. Facing growing concerns that their entire operating model is now at risk, the Trade Federation was desperate to find more leverage in their fight against the Republic. In extreme situations, usually extreme leadership and solutions begin to arise, and within the Trade Federation, the Neimoidian faction was seen as that faction. Given the cultural tendency of Neimoidians to do whatever was necessary in order to survive and succeed, they had the ability to take the Trade Federation to new heights. And the Sith began to notice this, which is not great for them, and they started selecting individuals that they wanted to mentor and eventually control. One of those individuals was Newt Gunray. They would add him and the Trade Federation to their growing number of pieces in their galactic game of chess against the Jedi and the Republic. You see, the Sith over the centuries have gathered more and more financial and political control within an organization called Damask Holdings, which was a financial holding company that also lobbied for various political interests. The Sith would use Damask Holdings to basically get what they wanted. The idea was to use unknown and known actors to create instability all over the Outer Rim territories and start a wider conflict that would create the type of fear and chaos that the Sith would usually thrive in. Now, roughly a decade earlier, a group of smugglers and pirates would combine into a larger organization known as the Star Commercial Combine. Their goal was to raid Trade Federation shipping lanes and resell the goods to the people in the Outer Rim at a discounted price. Leading the Combine was Ico Stark, a charismatic Robin Hood-like figure who was just another pawn in the Sith game. The Sith's plan was to cause enough damage to the Trade Federation that the Republic would be forced to give them some concessions because the Republic didn't really have a navy, the judicial forces were relatively limited, and right now the Trade Federation were basically alone in combating this pirate and bandit threat. The idea here was to help the Trade Federation fully militarize. This, of course, would help Darth Sidious create the foundations for the corporate military force that would play a huge role in the blockade in Naboo and in the Clone Wars. At the same time, the Star Commercial Combine managed to steal one of the largest shipments of Bacta in the galaxy. This is actually shortly after the largest and only Bacta factory in the galaxy was destroyed. probably not a coincidence. Bacta, if you didn't know, was kind of like this miracle cure fluid that was used for a wide range of ailments and injuries. It was one of those commodities that was just extremely comfortable, and now the Stark Commercial Combine was holding on to the largest shipment of it in the entire galaxy. Now, there are some other players involved in this situation as well. First, we have Senator Finis Valorum. At the time, he led the moderates in the Senate who wanted to see the Stark Combine and Trade Federation settle their dispute through negotiations and diplomacy. And then we have Ranulph Tarkin, cousin of Wilhoff Tarkin. He was a militarist, and he was interested in building a federal military force. He had turned his home planet's defense force, the Outland Region Security Force, into a model for a future federal military. And right now, he saw a great opportunity to intervene in the escalating Bacta crisis in the Outer Rim. Eventually, the Republic would choose to intervene in the crisis, and they would send several PDFs, including Ranulph Tarkin's Outlands Regions Security Force, along with a few Jedi to aid the Trade Federation in their fight against the Pirate Collective. This would ignite the Stark Hyperspace War, a short but very deadly conflict. Ranulph Tarkin would die along with several Jedi assigned to the mission. Finis Valorum, who would serve as the voice for peace during this event, would eventually run for Supreme Chancellor, and his actions during the conflict would really help him secure all those votes he needed. And the Stark Commercial Combine would be broken up after the conflict, leaving large pockets of disgruntled pirates and smugglers, which sets the scene for 33 BBY. After a decade of failed negotiations and attempts to rein in the excesses of the Trade Federation's operations in the Outer Rim, a meeting was organized by Senator Palpatine between the Republic and the Trade Federation on the planet Eriadu, long seen as one of the major population centers in the Outer Rim. For you Bad Batch fans out there, Eriadu is the planet where Season 2 ended on. There was also a summit on Eriadu during those episodes, but that happens during the Imperial Era. Supreme Chancellor Finis Valorum had proposed a compromise with the corporate powers that were involved in this matter. In exchange for bringing taxation to the Outer Rim territories, the corporate entities were going to be given further opportunities to militarize their forces. At the same time, Senator Palpatine also wanted every party that was involved in this matter to be in attendance. Many groups were invited, including the Hutts, the Corporate Alliance, the Commercial Guild, the Techno Union, even the Stark Veteran Assembly, along with the Trade Federation. But one organization Palpatine purposely left out was known as the Nebula Front. You guys remember the Stark Commercial Combine we talked about before? Well, after the conflict, one faction of this group broke away and started their own organization known as the Nebula Front. Now, depending on who you ask, these individuals might be considered terrorists or freedom fighters. Many members within the Nebula Front had direct experience living under the Trade Federation and their cruel practices. This group was completely anti-corporatist. They believed that any additional tariffs on shipping lanes would just increase the operational costs for the Trade Federation, which would pass on those additional costs to the people who use their services. And so they didn't really like the Republic either. And officially speaking, they were against any new taxes on the free trade zone for that reason. A more extreme faction of the Nebula Front were secretly working for the Lieutenant Governor of Eriadu, Wilhoff Tarkin, who also happened to be in cahoots with the Sith. It was under Tarkin's command that the Nebula Front would actually hire assassins to take out Finis Valorum, although even that was a ruse because the real target for that assassination was actually the Trade Federation's Directorate. At the time, Newt Gunray was the Viceroy, but the rest of the Directorate was multi-species, and the Nebula Front attack would actually kill off the entire board, allowing Neimoidians to just completely take over leadership in this company. In the coming months, Darth Sidious would have great plans for the Trade Federation and would ultimately pressure the Neimoidians into blockading Naboo, something that I don't think would have happened if the Neimoidians had not consolidated power beneath their faction. The Sith would use intimidation and also their knowledge of their organization to basically turn the Trade Federation into their personal plaything, and the faction would be at the center of the Separatist crisis and provide quite a lot of war material for the conflict. Then you have the attempted assassination on Finis Valorum. This gave the Supreme Chancellor a temporary boost in political power, which allowed him to eventually pass Senate Resolution BR 0371, which is essentially the plan we mentioned before. The Trade Federation will now be taxed, and the conglomerates will be allowed to add more lasers to their freighters and, hire more individuals for the ground forces. The Jedi Order, which had been tasked with protecting the summit, had failed spectacularly, which further hurts their image in the galaxy. And Valorum was given further restrictions by the Senate on how he can use the Judicials and Jedi Order as a result. Basically, everything turned out great for the Sith. The Naboo crisis would happen shortly after and serve as a dry run for the Clone Wars. Finis Valorum, despite enjoying a momentary boost in ratings, would see his own popularity decline when it was clear that this man didn't have the solutions that the galaxy needed for its many problems. And shortly after that, Finis Valorum would be replaced by Palpatine after he mishandled the Naboo crisis. The Sith were truly masters at using money and political power to carefully guide the actions of the leaders of the galaxy. Ultimately, all the individuals involved, Nute Gunray, Finis Valorum, and the Nebular Front, were just pawns of Darth Sidious and Darth Plagueis. And so the Eriadu Trade Summit, while not very well known by many Star Wars fans, is perhaps one of the most important events that happens prior to the Clone Wars. Without it, I don't think the Clone Wars would have happened as easily. As you can see, while the Jedi were playing the short game and focused on short-term results, the Sith were playing the long game, and they were slowly planting seeds for their future takeover. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe, hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy.